Hello, my name's Wendy Dolan and I'm a textile artist based in Hove in Sussex. I've worked in textiles all my life and I love working with texture and layering. I'm an experienced tutor and lecturer and I sell my artwork at craft shows, exhibitions and share my techniques with everybody wherever I go. So all of my designs start off with natural fabrics. So I'm using a variety of fabrics. I'm selecting them for their texture. It's a great way of recycling fabrics. You can use old tablecloths, old sheets, old curtains, so anything. But I'm looking for natural fabrics. So I've got cheesecloth, has got a different texture to a fine muslin. Then you've got a woven cotton here, and cotton calico. A basic cotton calico will always be my base fabric. And then these other fabrics, silk noil has a lovely slub texture, and I've got loosely woven cotton scrim. So when I'm working on a design, and this is for a little treescape, so this is one of the samples for the kits that I produce for people to create their own design. It will start with me selecting. I've got cotton batting, I've got silk noil, I've got a white cotton and calico, and the fabrics I tear. So by tearing the strips of fabric, I can create texture with the edges as well as the different values of the texture of the fabrics there. So they're pieced and layered according to the landscape design I'm working on. I'll then work into that, stitch the fabrics down. So it's freehand machine stitching, and I'm using a white cotton thread to do the holding down. Just stitching the fabrics around, but I can add extra texture if I want to. So here I'm adding some extra rock textures to suggest the rocks in the foreground. Once I'm happy with my layering, I paint it. So I'm using water-based fabric paints to colour my background. Any paints can do. Fabric paint ideal because it leaves fabric soft to handle. I can iron it to fix it before working into it again. So I've mixed up my colours. The pigments I use are very thick, so I can control where I put the colour. I'll use a paintbrush. When I put the colour on, because I haven't diluted it with water, I can control the edges, so it's not going to bleed from one section to another. So the distant area here is just a lighter version of this mixed up terracotta colour, so I can vary the tones as I go, and the foreground here with the rocks. Once I've got the colour on, I then start embroidering on top. So I've worked first of all across the background, so I've got these background layers coming through here, and I've got the different layers of texture, so bringing in my coloured threads. I'm suggesting rocks and texture in the foreground, and then I have my tree that I've embroidered through. So that's all on top. So it really is layering. So I've got the layering of the fabric, the layering of the white stitching to start with, then the layering on with the paint, and now I'm layering on the stitching as I work through it. So that's the basic technique that I use there. I can bring in extra textures. So there are various products that I can use, such as expander print. So this is a three-dimensional fabric medium, and I can sponge that onto the surface of my fabric, apply heat with a heat gun, or lay baking parchment on top, and it will puff up, and it gives these lovely textures. So on this design here, this is one of the projects in my book, and in the foreground here, to give this lovely rocky, craggy texture, I applied some of the expander print before the painting. But again, a very similar design. Some of these, the one I showed earlier, this one is a sample for a kit that I produce. So on my website you can buy kits, and at shows I sell them, so you can create your own textured design. So textures with the expander print, but also creating interesting textures with the stitching. I can use a variety of weights of thread, so by using thicker yarn, cotton perlé, I can use that in the machine, but I will use that in the bobbin. I'm working on a design at the moment, so this was layered. I had all the different layers of textures underneath, painted it, and now I'm building up layers of grasses, and now I'm putting in some flowers. So with a basic domestic sewing machine, set up for freehand stitching, I'm just running on a straight stitch and manoeuvring the fabric around, creating little clusters of yellow flowers. move to another area. And keep working around balancing the design as I go. So as an artist, I'm always looking at the balance of the image. But my machine is my pencil. So this is my drawing tool, and this is what I'm drawing with. As I move across from one to another, my joining threads will be trimmed off as I go. Machine embroidery is all about practice, so the more hours you spend at your sewing machine literally doodling. It's just straight stitch. I will occasionally use zigzag stitch to give textural effects, but just working across and building up this design. So this is what we call granite stitch I'm doing at the moment for the little tiny flowers. So the machine's running fast, I'm just moving in very tiny little movements to build a cluster. It's an ideal texture for flowers, for rocks, for moss, lichen, so tiny little crusty textures, crumbly walls. I'll quite often work with architectural features. So here I've layered quite simple strips of fabric. So I'm keeping this one quite simple. I then painted it. I'll often use paper collage to decide how my colour scheme is going to be balanced. To transfer the image, with the natural forms, flowers, foliage, I'm just freehand stitching it. If it's something architectural, I'll draw out my design. So this is my reverse transfer technique. I will draw out the design onto a separate piece of my stitch tearaway stabiliser, and then initially I will stitch around from the wrong side, so my bobbin thread is creating the stitched outline. Once that's been outlined, I will then start working into it with my surface stitching, emphasising detail and definition. So that's an architectural one. Here's another one in progress, so starting to work on that. Some of these textures, I've got this crumbly wall texture, and that's using this expander print. So before I painted, I could put some of these interesting textures on. I'm just working with limited colour schemes as well, so colour schemes don't have to be too involved and complicated, so sometimes I'll keep the colour scheme quite simple. I run Zoom workshops, so they're available for everybody throughout the world. We had a lot over the last few months, and I have many scheduled on my website. I'm a tutor. I teach out at Westdean College in Sussex, and I teach groups and guilds all over the country. I led an Indian textile tour last February, which we just got back before lockdown, and I'm hoping to return to India with another trip probably in 2023, and just sharing experiences and sharing skills with them. For anyone down in the south of England, I run weekly classes which can encourage people to really develop their textile skills.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.